we met, I was talking to you about what then was a finished object, my Schiaparelli Bowknot sweater.
And action. Live from New York, it's Show and Tell.
Hi, I'm Billy, and that was my new executive producer, my husband of almost 30 years. Today, I have a pretty action-packed show for you. I'm going to show you, once again, a finished object, which needed a little tweaking. I'm going to show you something that I'm currently working on, and then I'm going to show you a future product, and there's a little backstory to that, which we'll get to. Normally, I'm wearing a sweater on this show because it is, after all, a knitting program. I do have a necklace that belonged to my grandmother. She brought it here from Europe. I think my grandma came to the United States in something like 1908, 1909, something like that. And she's really on my mind today because just yesterday we celebrated the 111th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. Fortunately, my grandmother was not involved in it, although I do know someone who came this close to having his grandmother involved in it. Her shift had just ended shortly before the fire. So I'm going to have a little special little segment on Triangle Shirtwaist. And for that, I thought today I would try and wear a shirtwaist dress. So let me just stand up and show you a little bit of this. This would not have been from that period, but I believe this is considered a shirtwaist dress since it comes to the waist like a shirt would. The last time we met, I had shown you my Schiaparelli Bowknot sweater and called it a finished object, but I had mentioned that the sleeve seemed a little short. And when I talked to the other people in my knit-along group, they agreed that the sleeves were short. So I ripped out the crochet edging and I ripped back the bind off edge, put my needles back in and spit spliced my leftover yarn onto here, and I've lengthened one sleeve so far. But while we're on the topic of this yarn, I wanted to just mention anecdotally that whenever I get to this part of a ball of yarn, it reminds me of my favorite mummy in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And I'll put a picture in here to show you how that weave really does resemble this weave. I also wanted to show this yarn. This is from the other sleeve. This is what I ripped out. It's all kinky, curly, right? This had the same amount ripped out from the crochet edging and the cast off. I did not recondition the yarn. I just went ahead and reknit. Maybe you can see a little bit of a line of demarcation there, but I think it looks very good, good enough. And someday this will be washed and blocked. And if there is any additional crinkling, it should hang out. So just another accolade for Rowan Felted Tweed. I had mentioned previously that with this bow, I had ripped out a large section many, many times, at least 8 times. And I never reconditioned the yarn. I always just reknit with it. It didn't lose any fiber. It still looks new. So I think that's rather an amazing feature. So kudos to Rowan for their felted tweed. Moving right along to my work in progress. This has been such a quick, easy knit, except for the fact that it was too big. So a little hard to know with cotton. It doesn't behave the same way as wool, duh. But the sweater has an unusual construction to it, so it was a little hard to really know until I started trying it on. And to try it on, you have to have enough. If you just have this much, it doesn't do anything for you. This pattern is the slit neckline that is going to be the focus of my next knit along starting May 1st. There's a link below in the show notes of how you can join in on that. The pattern is vintage. It's from the 1930s. It calls for 2 inches of ribbing, which initially I did. And then when I got to the point where I wanted to try it on, I felt like it wasn't hitting my waist in a good spot. So I decided to rip back to the ribbing and extend the ribbing. And I also needed to take in both the front and the back. In this particular pattern, the front and the back are knit to different widths. So that tripped me up a little bit. I know it shouldn't have. So here's where I'm at. I've tried it on. I'm very pleased now with how it fits. And it knit up so quickly that I really didn't hesitate to rip out 6 or 8 inches. This is on a size 5 needle. And here's the yarn that I'm using, which, by the way, Good Loops has offered a 15% discount on any of their yarns if people want to use it for the knit along. So I'm using their product called Eco Lush, 40% bamboo viscose and 60% cotton. And this gets 31 stitches and 34 rows to 4 inches or 10 centimeters on, according to them, a 2.5 to 3 millimeter needle. As I said, I'm using a size 5 needle, and I think that's the gauge that I'm getting. So this sweater has these unusual tabs at the top that will link up to a collar band, and where you see this little yellow stitch marker, that's the standing in for my future button, and there's a buttonhole there. So I'm almost done with this. This is one sleeve that I've already sewn in, and for me, because I have a heavyish arm, I enlarged this sleeve band so that it would fit me. And then I just made a future adjustment for how many stitches there were to make sure that I got it down to the right number of stitches in order to do those tabs at the top. So it's coming along. I'm very pleased with it, and I hope that you'll join me when we do the knit along. The last thing I wanted to talk about is a future project. I think it's what I will do when I complete this charcoal colored sweater. My nephew and his wife are going to have a baby in August, and I thought it would be nice for Aunt Billy to knit that baby a sweater. So I sent an email to my niece saying, here are a handful of sweater patterns that I've selected that I'm prepared to knit for you. Would you like to choose one of them? Let me show you those sweaters. Just a moment. This is an assortment of baby sweaters that I put together in my Ravelry favorites. I created a folder and I selected these sweaters, which I thought were rather cute. And I tried to have something that was contemporary, like the skull and crossbone and the little shrug, and then something that was a little feminine with the lace ribbing. And this one, because I thought it was cropped, I thought that's sort of like contemporary. And this, because it just seems very sweet. And I gave her some suggestions of how it might look in different colorways. This one was not one that I suggested, but I'll explain why that's there in just a moment. So I thought this was a pretty good smattering. So she came back to me with an email that had in its body this photo of a sweater from Etsy. With a little note that said, I love the ones that you sent, but if it would be possible, I'd like to have something like this with my baby's name on it. And we're into neutrals, or even a very blush pink would be fine. So I went to Ravelry to look for something like that. And that's that orange sweater that you saw on the left. However, that sweater is crochet, it's not knit. And I'm going to be making a knit sweater. So I'm probably going to publish my first pattern, because I will create a very simple pattern for making this sweater. And I haven't yet decided. I'm going to swatch a few different stitches to try and get this effect. I'm going to break away and do the package opening of the yarn that I've ordered for this. And then when I come back, we're going to talk about the yarn and how we think it's going to work up, and if I'm going to be able to achieve this look. So the package has arrived from Lovecrafts, and with my mother's 1950s scissors in hand, I am going to slice this open and do the yarn reveal for the Ella baby sweater. Ta-da! I think it's just going to be perfect because it's pink, but it's not super pink. It really is blush. And the yarn looks like it has a very interesting texture. So it's called Punto by Schachenmeyer, and it's to be knit with size 8 to 10 US needles, so that's 4.5, 5.5 millimeter, and it's 55% cotton and 45% acrylic. It's very soft, it's baby soft, so I'll be casting this on pretty soon. I don't know if you can hear all the work that's being done in the street outside our apartment building today. Today it happens to be a Saturday. These guys are hard at work. Yesterday, some genius decided to accidentally cut our gas line. They've been working on resurfacing the street outside, so they had the whole street opened up. And I'm not sure if that's when this happened, but we went to turn on the stove to boil a pot of water and the pilot light was out. But it wasn't only out on one set of burners, it was out on the other set of burners. And in fact, the oven pilot light was also out. And I thought, I've lived here for 45 years. I've had this stove. This is a 1960s stove that I own. It's a workhorse. It's really very basic and hardly anything can go wrong. And I thought that's the first time in 45 years that all 3 pilot lights are out. Something doesn't feel right about this. So we called down to the doorman and we said, is the gas out in the building? Well, I'd been busy working yesterday and I didn't see the emails that said there's an emergency. The gas pipeline was accidentally cut. And the power company is coming around to every apartment, checking, they're turning off the valves. So I believe that today they're working on those repairs. And as long as they're out making noise, I guess they figured they would continue working on resurfacing the street. I think they're almost done. It's just ironic that so often when I sit down to podcast, and it doesn't matter what day of the week or what time of day, there's always something, which may lead you to think that New York is a very noisy place. I just can't tell you being up on the 9th floor and set back from the street the way our building is, how very quiet it usually is. This is certainly an anomaly. Saturday morning at 7:30 a.m., they were making this noise. I was up, I didn't mind, but I bet a lot of other people in the neighborhood are very put out by this. Anyway, the yarn. So here it is. I was expecting this because it's aran weight. I was expecting this to be much thicker than it is. Maybe I imagined that it was going to be closer to chunky. That's fingering weight. It's slimmer for sure, but it's hard for me to believe that this is going to give me 4.5 stitches to the inch on a size 8 needle. Should I try it out with you right now? Or should I do that on my own? I'm going to have to swatch sometime. So hang on, let me get a set of size 8 needles queued up. I'll be right back. Of course, while I went to get my needles, all the sounds stopped outside. I know you won't believe that. If you haven't seen ChiaoGoos before, this is a ChiaoGoo cord, and they're interchangeable needles. Let me show you inside my set. So I have the complete set that goes from size 2 US to size 15, which is from 2.75 millimeter up to 16 millimeter. I can't read that. Something like that. Big. Here's how they work. You screw this in, and then they give you keys. Different sets have different types of keys, but this is one that works, just a regular T-pin. And you hold that as you twist it, the needle, and it tightens it tighter than you can with the strength of your own hands. So here I am. My shorter cords are all in use right now with my other projects. But nevertheless, I'm just going to cast on a little bit. You don't usually get to see me knit, so let's see if we can rectify that. If you're a new knitter, I'm just pulling off about that amount of yarn. It's random for doing a swatch. It's a little more than a foot, maybe 16 inches or so. And I do the long tail cast on. Oh, I see right away. It is chunkier than I was expecting. So that's good. I mean, I was expecting chunkier yarn, but I can see from casting on that the stitches are spaced further apart than what I anticipated this thickness yarn was going to give me. I'm generally knitting with fingering weight, not exclusively, but I feel like I know fingering better than I know other weights. So let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11, 12. 16, 17, 18, oops, 19, 20. I'm gonna keep going until I run out of yarn, which looks like I have. And I don't think there's gonna be any stockinette in this sweater, so I'm not even gonna swatch for stockinette. I'm gonna go right into ribbing. Just to get a feel for what that's like. And actually I would probably want to do it on a finer needle because I might have, it's very splitty, this yarn. It's because it's my very first row. Let's see. I mainly chose this yarn because it was aran weight and it was brush pink, and I didn't want wool. They live in Florida. I wanted something that was going to be cotton and washable for a mommy with young children, baby and another child. So I don't know if you can see me. I think I keep slipping off the screen. Let me adjust my screen down a little bit. My camera's going to go out probably. Yeah, that might work better. Probably put music here because this would be completely boring for you. Looks like it's going to be chunky. I probably wanted chunkier, but it was hard to find in this color and cotton and. Okay, that's how it looks so far. Keep going. I think the color is really pretty. I like this color for myself. I definitely think I'll have no problem knitting this on a thinner needle. But as always, I want to see what the fabric is like because I want it to have that real bulky kind of look. I have never done twisted rib where you knit through the back loop. I think I'm going to try that. I find that my ribbing doesn't tend to be really straight. Sometimes the stitches are kind of wobbly. So I'm probably a good candidate for always doing twisted rib. Just don't think about it or automatically go into regular ribbing. But this seems like a good occasion to try, so I'm going to do a row of that. Oops. So go into the back loop, even on the first stitch. Yes, so. Regular purl through the back loop. I'm gonna have to get used to that, as I have a very specific rhythm for knitting ribbing. Now I have to change that rhythm up to go through the back loop. I guess after you do it 1,000 times, it becomes second nature. I have to think to myself, okay, put the yarn back. Whereas when I'm doing regular ribbing, it's automatic. I don't think about it. But this isn't even one row yet, and already I feel like I'm getting in the groove. Plus, I'm not usually talking to you when I'm knitting. After this row, let's take a look at it. I think that's going to be good. I don't know, it might be a little bit too loosey-goosey. I might go down, might try another needle size. And I'm going to do some other types of ribbing, so we'll see. Okay. Next up, I wanted to talk to you about yesterday's 111th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire. I took a walk over there today. It's a short walk from where I live, and I'll put a map here so you can see where I live and where that building stands. And I also put a little push pin where my grandparents lived in 1920, but I suspect that they lived there prior to that as well. They got married in 1919 after my grandfather came home from World War I, and my father was born the following year. So it's not exactly where my grandmother would have resided at the time of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, but she lived in this general area. It would have been about a 10-minute walk, 10 or 15-minute tops walk, if she had worked at that location, which fortunately she did not. Looking at this map, if you made an equilateral triangle with the base of the triangle connecting those two red push pins, I live on the third corner of that triangle. So we're all kind of equidistant from one another. So I'm going to show you some footage. I walked around there while I tell you a little bit about the history of the place and what happened there on March 25th, 1911. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was located at the corner of Green Street and Washington Place, which you see here. Today it's called the Ash Building. And the factory was on the 8th, 9th, and 10th, the three uppermost floors of this building, where there would have been fire escapes like the ones that you see down the street. Today, all these buildings are owned by NYU. All the buildings, or many of the buildings surrounding Washington Square Park, which we'll get to in a moment. Because this isn't far from where I live, I often find myself in this neighborhood. And years ago, I saw a plaque. I had never noticed it before, and today I couldn't even find that plaque. But there's hardly anything there that would indicate to you that on March 25th, 1911, a terrible fire killed 146 people and injured many others on this very spot. Most of the victims were recent Italian or Jewish immigrant women and girls aged from 14 to 23. On the stickers that people have put there today, the name tags, you can see the names and ages of some of those people. And across the street on the sidewalk, people with chalk wrote their names yesterday to commemorate them. It wasn't just the fire, it was also smoke inhalation or people falling or jumping to their deaths that made this the deadliest industrial disaster in the history of New York City and one of the deadliest in U.S. history. Today it would be unthinkable to lock stairwells and exits, but back then it was a common practice to prevent workers from taking excessive breaks or to maybe rob the company. This tragedy led to legislation that required factories to improve their safety standards, and it helped spur the growth of the International Ladies Garments Workers Union, which fought for better working conditions for sweatshop workers. The fire marshals suspected that the fire was caused by either an unextinguished match or a cigarette butt that may have been thrown into a scrap bin that had an accumulation of 2 months' worth of cuttings. There were hundreds of pounds of scraps left over from several thousand shirtwaists that had been cut at that table. The flimsy fire escape that couldn't support the amount of traffic that was put upon it that day, coupled with the fire department's ladders only reaching the 7th floor, perhaps contributed to the horrific outcome that day. There's a very interesting video that was put together by this coalition to have a permanent memorial on the corner where this fire took place. I'll leave the link to it down below in the show notes. The thrust of it is that there's going to be a 30-foot steel ribbon that will run up the side of the building, indicating where the fire started, and etched into that steel are photographic images of pieces of fabric that were put together by a wide array of people, students, artists, people who are descended from the women who perished in this fire. So there's all different sorts of textures and patterns that have been scanned, and then the photograph has been etched into this very unusual steel ribbon. Now, the names of the people who died and their ages are also done in a very interesting way. It involves reflection, so you don't look directly at the names, you look at the reflection of the names. I encourage you to watch the video because you'll be able to see it better. Just opposite the building where the fire took place is Washington Square Park, which stands at the base of Fifth Avenue. Many visitors to New York find their way to this beautiful park with its 77-foot-high Washington Square arch. Now, if you've been watching the HBO television series, The Gilded Age, you may have become familiar with the architect Stanford White. Stanford White, part of the firm McKim, Mead & White, is responsible for many of the great buildings and monuments in New York City. He, in fact, designed this arch to imitate a Roman triumphal arch. And there's a variety of statues of Washington and other iconography on the arch, all pertaining to war and peace. This was designed to commemorate the centennial of George Washington's inauguration as President of the United States. Just slightly north on Fifth Avenue is a small private street called Washington Mews, and I'll walk you through there now as we end our little tour of Greenwich Village today. The adorable houses you see on this cobblestone street were originally built as stables for the homes that face them. Those homes are bordering on Washington Square Park, which we just saw. Over the years, famous people have lived in these homes. People like the first president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the architect Richard Morris Hunt, who designed part of the Metropolitan Museum, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who founded the Whitney Museum, and other artists such as Edward Hopper, that would be in the 20th century. When additional homes were built facing the original stables, built in a compatible style. And the beauty of those was their windows face north. So for artists, that northern light is really essential. I'm going to have to say goodbye to you from here and wish you happy knitting, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me today.